The Identity Shift, Becoming the Version of You Who Has It All. Written by Kelvin W. Introduction. There comes a moment, a quiet, undeniable whisper within, when you realize you're not just hungry for more, you're ready to become more. Not more in the sense of acquiring things, accolades, or approval, but more in terms of who you are being in the world. You've achieved things before. You've set goals, crushed some, abandoned others. Maybe you've reinvented your career, your relationships, or your lifestyle. But now, the transformation you crave is deeper. It's not about doing, it's about being. And that shift begins with a bold truth. Everything you desire is already waiting for the version of you who is aligned with it. The world will try to convince you to chase outcomes, more money, better connections, status, the dream life out there somewhere. But what if you could skip the hustle, the proving, the constant external striving? What if your next level doesn't require you to grind harder, but instead to align deeper? Because the truth is, the version of you who has it all isn't a distant fantasy. It's an identity you can step into now. That's what this book is about. The identity shift is the process of upgrading your internal operating system so your outer life naturally recalibrates. It's not magic, though it may feel magical. It's not superficial, though its effects will show up everywhere, from your bank account to your relationships to your peace of mind. It's the most strategic move you'll ever make, becoming the version of you who lives, chooses, and creates from abundance, not fear, not lack, not ego. You don't attract what you want, you attract who you are. That truth can feel confronting at first, but it's also wildly liberating. It means you don't have to wait. You don't have to earn the right to evolve. You only need to make a new decision about who you are and back it with conviction, action, and consistency. When your identity changes, your reality follows. Period. But here's the part no one tells you. Shifting your identity isn't about faking it until you make it. It's about rehearsing the truth of who you already are underneath the conditioning. Beneath the self-doubt, the stories you've inherited, and the expectations you've carried like armor, there's a you who is ready. A version of you who's not just capable, but inevitable. This book will challenge you, call you forward, and walk beside you as you evolve. It's not a pep talk. It's not another list of things to do. It's a recalibration of your self-perception. The old you, driven by scarcity, fear, and false ceilings, helped you survive. But the new you, the abundant one, they are here to help you thrive. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about unbecoming everything that isn't you, so the real, limitless you can lead. You're not chasing the life you want. You're becoming the person who naturally lives it. The identity shift begins now. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Call to Become More. There is a moment that comes without warning. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or flashing signs, and yet it changes everything. You wake up one day and realize that the life you've built, no matter how successful or stable it appears, no longer feels like it fits. It's not that you're failing. It's not that anything is necessarily broken. In fact, from the outside, things might look fine, even enviable, but deep inside, there's a subtle ache, a quiet pull toward something more. Not more stuff, not more noise, not even more recognition, just more you, more freedom, more alignment, more truth. You can feel it in the space between your actions and your authenticity. You can hear it in the silence after a busy day, when everything slows down and your soul starts to speak. This moment, the call to become more, is both terrifying and exhilarating. It doesn't always make sense. It doesn't care about your to-do list or the story you've told others about who you are. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply invites you into a greater version of yourself, a version that you might not fully know yet, but one that already exists within you, waiting to be chosen. You see, we live in a world obsessed with doing, Hustle more, achieve more, fix yourself, add new habits, upgrade your productivity. But the identity shift isn't about stacking new behaviors on top of a fractured self-image. It's about stepping back and asking a far more important question. Who am I becoming? When you ask that with honesty, you realize that many of your actions have been responses to fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, fear of being truly seen. So much of what we do is designed to manage perception rather than align with truth. But the call to become more isn't about appearances, it's about resonance. You can feel when your current life isn't aligned with your future self because the gap between them becomes heavy. You start noticing the conversations you no longer want to have, the roles you're tired of playing, the masks that feel harder to hold up. You begin to sense that if you don't say yes to this internal evolution, you'll spend your life performing instead of living, and that's a cost you're no longer willing to pay. Answering the call to become more isn't about rejecting your past. It's about honoring what brought you here while refusing to stay small. It requires courage, not because transformation is dangerous, but because it threatens everything familiar. Humans crave safety. We're wired to cling to what we know, even if what we know is limiting. We'd rather repeat patterns than risk expansion because the known, even when it's unfulfilling, feels safer than the unknown. But there's a deeper part of you that's not interested in safety anymore. It's interested in wholeness. And wholeness doesn't come from playing the same identity loop over and over. It comes from stretching into the version of you who leads with vision, not fear. Most people never fully answer that call. They hear it, they feel it, but they stay busy enough to drown it out. They convince themselves they're being practical or responsible, when in reality, they're just afraid of stepping outside the life they've carefully curated. But the truth is, your next level doesn't live inside your current identity, it lives beyond it. And the only way to access that level is to become the person who belongs there. Not just think like them or act like them temporarily, but truly become them. Becoming more doesn't mean fixing who you are. It means remembering who you've always been underneath the noise. There's a version of you that has always known. The child version who dreamed boldly before life taught you to shrink. The creative version who lit up when they imagined the future without filtering it through fear. That part of you isn't gone. It's waiting for you to stop making decisions from a place of survival, waiting for you to stop pretending that staying comfortable is the same as being content, waiting for you to stop postponing your evolution until everything around you feels safe. The call to become more doesn't require you to blow up your life. It doesn't mean abandoning your responsibilities or making reckless choices. It means deciding internally that you're no longer willing to live below your potential. It means choosing to view your identity not as a fixed label, but as an evolving foundation. You're not defined by your past, your mistakes, your achievements, or your job title. You're defined by the identity you choose to embody moment by moment, day by day. That's what makes the identity shift so powerful. It puts you back in control of the story. If you've felt the pull, if you've heard the whisper that says, "This isn't all there is," then consider this your confirmation. You're not crazy. You're not ungrateful. You're not being unrealistic. You're waking up. You're tuning into a deeper frequency of who you are. And yes, stepping into that version of yourself will cost you something. It will cost you your old excuses. It will cost you the comfort of victimhood. It will cost you the identity you've used to stay small. But what you gain will be far greater. You'll gain alignment. You'll gain clarity. You'll gain access to the kind of peace that only comes from living as your true self. The call to become more is sacred. It's not about ego, it's not about performance. It's about answering the invitation to evolve with your whole heart. It's about saying yes to your own expansion, not because something is wrong with your life, but because something is right with your soul. This chapter marks the beginning, not of a new journey, but of a new you. And the moment you commit to that version of yourself, life begins to rearrange itself in your favor. Because when you shift your identity, you shift your reality. And when that happens, nothing is ever the same again. Chapter 2. What is the identity shift? To change your life, you must change your identity. That's the core idea we're working with, and it's not a motivational soundbite, it's a universal truth. Most people chase change on the surface. They set goals, create action plans, make resolutions, and hope that effort alone will push them across the threshold into a new life. But inevitably, they find themselves circling back to familiar behaviors, emotional loops, or self-sabotaging habits. They interpret this as failure or lack of willpower, when in reality it's simply misalignment. Because no matter how many habits you adopt, or how many hours you hustle, you will never sustainably outperform your self-image. You will always act in accordance with who you believe you are. That's where the identity shift begins. Identity isn't just a concept. It's your internal GPS. It shapes what you think is possible, what you believe you deserve, and how you interpret the world around you. It informs your standards, your relationships, your emotional reactions, your choices, and even your perception of time. And the most important part? Most people have no idea that they're living from a default identity, a collection of stories, beliefs, and expectations they inherited or absorbed without question. Identity is not fixed, but it becomes rigid when left unexamined. You didn't consciously choose most of the identity you currently operate from. Much of it was formed in early life, through family dynamics, cultural narratives, early experiences of praise or punishment, trauma, and repetition. If you were constantly rewarded for being responsible, you may have unconsciously adopted the identity of the caretaker or the overachiever. If you were criticized for wanting more, you might have learned to shrink yourself to be light. If you experienced rejection, you may have built your entire adult life around avoiding risk. These stories become scripts, and over time the script becomes who you think you are. But here's the truth. Identity is not who you are. It's just who you've been being. The identity shift is the conscious decision to rewrite that script. It's not just about visualizing a better version of your life. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts and sustains that life. It's about making decisions, taking actions, and holding standards that are consistent with the version of you who already lives in the reality you desire. That's the key distinction. Identity is cause, not effect. It's the root, not the fruit. When you shift your identity, your behaviors follow, your emotions recalibrate, your energy shifts, your outcomes begin to align. And this alignment is not about forcing anything. It's about removing the internal friction between who you are and who you're trying to be. You've probably experienced moments of identity shift before, even if you didn't call it that. Think about when you moved to a new city, started a new career, ended a toxic relationship, or took a leap of faith. Those moments required more than courage. They required an internal redefinition of self. You had to see yourself differently in order to make those choices. You had to believe something new about who you were and what you were capable of. And once that belief took root, your reality shifted to match it. The external change was simply catching up to an internal decision. The problem is, many people try to live a new life while clinging to their old identity. They want the income but still see themselves as someone who struggles with money. They want the loving relationship but carry the identity of someone who's hard to love. They want to be visible and influential, but still wear the identity of the overlooked or the outsider. That internal contradiction creates self-sabotage, confusion, and burnout. You can't live a new life with an outdated self-concept. At some point, you must become unavailable for your old identity. This doesn't mean pretending to be someone you're not. It means shedding who you never truly were. The identity shift is not an act of self-rejection. It's an act of self-remembering. It's coming back into alignment with your innate worth, your natural wholeness, and your infinite potential. It's acknowledging that while your past shaped you, it does not own you. You can thank it for its lessons and still choose differently now. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to outgrow your own narrative. But identity work isn't passive. It doesn't happen just because you want it to. It happens through consistent alignment, thinking, speaking, and acting in accordance with the version of you who already has what you desire. That version of you exists now. They're not a fantasy, they're a frequency. And the more you tune in, the more real they become. At first it might feel uncomfortable, even fake. That's normal. The old identity will resist. It will whisper that you're not ready, that you're being unrealistic, that you should just be grateful for what you have. But gratitude and growth are not enemies. You can love your life and still expand it. You can honor your past and still rewrite your future. The identity shift also requires integrity, not moral perfection, but inner congruence. When your actions line up with your truth, you build trust with yourself, and self-trust is the currency of transformation. If you don't trust yourself to follow through, to hold your vision, to stay grounded in who you're becoming, you'll revert every time life gets uncertain. But when you start showing up as that new version, even when the results haven't arrived yet, you build momentum. Momentum, over time, becomes identity reinforcement. You're not changing for the world, you're changing for yourself. You're becoming someone who no longer asks for permission to expand, someone who doesn't negotiate with their vision, someone who is no longer ruled by who they were yesterday. That's the power of the identity shift. It doesn't just improve your life, it transforms your experience of being alive. And once you've tasted that level of alignment, you'll never settle for less again. The identity shift isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming someone more. And that process begins the moment you decide to stop living reactively and start living intentionally. Who you are becoming is not a fantasy. It's a choice. And it's a choice you get to make every single day, in every single moment, with every single thought and action. Because the real question isn't whether you're capable of becoming that version of yourself. The real question is whether you're willing to. Chapter 3. The Myth of Trying Harder. For much of your life, you've likely been praised for trying hard. From school to work to personal development, effort has been glorified as the ultimate virtue. Work ethic is admired. Persistence is applauded. The message is clear. If something isn't working, the answer is to try harder, push more, grind through, stay up later, be stronger. And if the breakthrough still doesn't come, try even harder. This mentality is so deeply ingrained that most people never question it. But at a certain point in your growth, trying harder becomes a trap. It keeps you locked in a loop of doing more of what already isn't working, and it blinds you to the truth that no amount of effort can compensate for misalignment. Trying harder can feel noble, but often it's a distraction. It gives the illusion of progress while keeping you stuck in the same paradigm. You're not meant to hustle your way into alignment. You're meant to align your way into ease. That's not the same as laziness or avoiding responsibility. It means that when your actions are in harmony with your identity, things begin to move more naturally. Flow returns, clarity sharpens, resistance softens, and effort becomes effective because it's coming from the right place, not from desperation or fear. When you're operating from an outdated identity, one rooted in lack, unworthiness, or overcompensation, trying harder doesn't elevate you. It deepens your entanglement in that identity. You keep taking action that reinforces the belief that you have to prove your value, that you have to earn your right to exist at a higher level. That worthiness is a reward for effort, not a starting point. So you double down, you make to-do lists, sign up for another course, push past exhaustion, and tell yourself that if you just keep going, something will finally click. But transformation isn't about doing more of the same, it's about choosing differently. It's about stepping into the identity of someone who doesn't need to prove they're enough because they've already decided they are. The most radical thing you can do in a culture obsessed with effort is to stop and ask, who is the version of me that this level of striving serves? If your answer is someone who is afraid, someone who feels behind, someone who doesn't trust that they can receive with ease, then trying harder is not the solution. It's the symptom. It reveals that your identity is still wrapped around struggle. And if struggle is your baseline, you'll keep creating situations where more struggle feels necessary. You'll keep reaching for effort as your default tool, even when ease is available, because you haven't yet become the person who believes they're allowed to have it easy. There's a difference between being committed and being compulsive. Commitment is grounded. It comes from clarity, from knowing what you want and honoring it with integrity. Compulsion, on the other hand, comes from fear. It says, if I stop, everything will fall apart. It drives you to keep moving not because the direction is right, but because stopping would force you to sit with the discomfort of misalignment. Many people stay busy for that reason. They don't want to face the silence, because in the silence, the truth speaks. And the truth might say that all the effort in the world won't help if you're climbing the wrong mountain. The myth of trying harder keeps people chasing outcomes they don't even want anymore, just because they've invested so much in the pursuit. It keeps them stuck in relationships, careers, routines, and identities that feel familiar but suffocating. It convinces them that quitting is failure when sometimes it's the highest form of wisdom. It whispers that ease is a luxury only available once you've proven your worth. But here's what the identity shift teaches you. Ease isn't a reward. It's a result of being in alignment. And alignment isn't passive. It requires precision, self-awareness, and courage. It means taking responsibility not just for your actions, but for the identity behind them. You are allowed to stop pushing. You are allowed to pause and ask if the path you're on still fits the person you're becoming. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to rise without suffering for it. And none of that makes you weak. It makes you powerful, because it takes far more strength to walk away from the illusion of progress than to keep running in the wrong direction just to feel busy. Trying harder can be addictive. It gives you a sense of control. It makes you feel like you're doing something, even when you're avoiding the deeper work. But identity work asks a different question. What would the version of you who already has it all do right now? Would they be frantically proving themselves? Would they be burning out just to feel worthy? Would they be saying yes to things out of fear of missing out? Or would they be acting from calm, grounded certainty, not because they have nothing to do, but because their doing is coming from a place of being? This shift is subtle but transformative. It means you no longer define your progress by how exhausted you are. It means you stop measuring success by how much you've sacrificed. It means you begin to trust that results are not solely a product of exertion, but of alignment. And in that space, a new kind of power emerges, not the kind that needs to dominate or overwhelm, but the kind that knows who it is and moves accordingly. There will still be effort. There will still be days that require grit and focus. But the difference is, now you're acting from your future self, not your old story. You're no longer trying to prove your worth through struggle. You're embodying your worth through intention. And from that place, everything begins to shift. Trying harder may have brought you this far, but it won't take you to your next level. Because the next level doesn't ask for more hustle. It asks for a new identity. And once you choose that identity, you'll find that what once felt hard begins to unfold with ease. Not because life gets easier, but because you become someone who no longer chooses hard when ease is available. Chapter 4. Scarcity is a costume. Scarcity is not who you are, it's something you learn to wear. Like a costume slipped on in childhood or inherited from the people around you, scarcity became a way of interpreting the world. It taught you to see life through the lens of not enough. Never enough time, never enough money, never enough love, never enough certainty. You didn't choose it consciously, you absorbed it. You inherited it from generations who learned to survive by preparing for the worst. You picked it up from adults who believed that safety came from playing small and staying realistic. You watched people around you settle, shrink, and strive just to feel a little more secure. Eventually, the scarcity mindset didn't feel like a belief. It felt like reality. But scarcity isn't reality, it's a filter. And the longer you wear it, the more invisible it becomes. You begin to think it's just how life is. You interpret neutral events as threats. You hesitate to invest in yourself. You question your worth whenever something goes wrong. You view success as a limited resource that you must compete for. You withhold your desires because they feel unreasonable. And when others thrive, you quietly wonder if there's less left for you. All of this creates a world where you're constantly scanning for what's missing instead of appreciating what's present or expecting what's possible. The problem with scarcity isn't just that it limits your choices, it also shapes your identity. It convinces you that your worth is conditional, that you must earn ease, prove value, and struggle your way into abundance. So even when opportunities arrive, you don't trust them. Even when things go well, you brace for the drop. Even when life begins to expand, you self-sabotage to return to the familiar. Scarcity teaches you to survive, not to receive. And that's the tragedy. Because abundance isn't a prize you unlock through effort. It's a state of being you access through identity. To shift into abundance, you must first recognize how deeply scarcity has been woven into your internal narrative. Look at the way you speak to yourself. Listen to the doubts that surface when you dream big. Notice the tension you feel when you imagine receiving more than you think you've earned. Scarcity doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It tells you to wait until you're more prepared. It urges you to be grateful for what you have, as if desire is a betrayal. It warns you that if you step into too much power, people might reject you. It cloaks itself in caution, responsibility, humility, but underneath it's just fear wearing a socially acceptable disguise. Scarcity keeps you in a loop where you're always reacting, never receiving. You build your life around managing lack instead of creating possibility. You get comfortable tolerating situations that drain you because they feel safer than the unknown. You stay loyal to jobs, relationships, and routines that reflect who you used to be, not who you're becoming. And when the pain of stagnation grows loud enough, your first instinct isn't to rise, it's to retreat. That's how scarcity works. It doesn't just limit your external world, it rewires your nervous system to associate expansion with danger. But once you recognize that scarcity is a costume, you realize you can take it off. It doesn't belong to you. It's not your true nature. It's not your legacy unless you choose to carry it forward. And you don't owe anyone your loyalty to limitation. Not your family, not your past, not the version of you who once needed it to feel safe. Scarcity may have served a purpose, but it is not your identity. You are not the struggle. You are not the fear. You are not the story that says you can only go so far. You are the one who gets to decide what abundance looks and feels like now. The identity shift begins when you stop seeing abundance as something outside of you. It's not just in the numbers in your account or the things you can afford. It's in how you feel about your life when no one's watching. It's in how you treat yourself when you fail. It's in how boldly you express your desires without apology. Abundance is not about more. It's about wholeness. It's about showing up with the unshakable belief that there is always more available, not just for others, but for you. That life isn't a limited pie where someone else's success takes from your share. That love, opportunity, wealth, visibility, impact, joy, none of it is in short supply unless you believe it is. To step into this version of yourself, the one who lives in abundance, you must be willing to make different choices. You must become unavailable for conversations that revolve around lack. You must stop identifying with stories that keep you small. You must stop pretending that settling is noble. You must learn to recognize when your scarcity identity is in control, and you must interrupt it with action. Not just any action, but aligned, self-honoring action. The kind of choices your abundant self would make, even when they feel uncomfortable at first, because growth always feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong, it means you're in new territory. Removing the costume of scarcity doesn't happen in one decision. It happens in a series of small, brave moments. It's when you raise your prices. It's when you speak up instead of staying silent. It's when you rest without guilt. It's when you invest in your growth without waiting for outside permission. It's when you choose trust over fear, not because it's easy, but because it's who you're becoming. Over time, these moments add up. They create a new emotional baseline. They reinforce a new identity, and eventually you look around and realize your life reflects the abundance you've chosen to believe in. You'll still feel fear sometimes. That's normal. The difference is, you'll stop letting it define you. You'll stop wearing it like skin. You'll remember that fear is a feeling, not a verdict, and scarcity is a story, not a destiny. When you remove the costume, what's left is your true self. Powerful, worthy, radiant, and fully resourced. And from that place, abundance is not something you chase, it's something you embody. It becomes your natural state, because you've become the version of you who expects it, creates it, and receives it without question. Chapter 5. Meeting your future self. There is a version of you who already lives the life you dream about. They wake up grounded, not anxious. They move through the day with clarity, not confusion. They speak with certainty, not self-doubt. They make decisions without apology. They embody abundance as naturally as breathing. This version of you isn't an illusion or a fantasy. They are real. They already exist in potential. The only reason you haven't met them fully yet is because you've been too loyal to your current identity. You've been making choices from the perspective of who you've been, instead of aligning with who you are becoming. Meeting your future self is the turning point. It is the first step to collapsing the distance between where you are and where you want to be. To truly shift your life, you must become intimate with your future self. Not just imagine them vaguely, but study them. Feel into them. Listen to them. Let them inform your present. Most people try to create a better life while still carrying the energy of their past. They think they can drag their old mindset into a new reality, but that doesn't work. You can't build the next level with the same beliefs that built your current one. The future self isn't an upgraded version of your current limitations. It's a whole new frequency. It requires you to think, feel, and behave in ways that may feel unfamiliar at first, because they challenge everything you've used to define yourself. The future self already lives with the outcomes you want. But more importantly, they hold a different emotional baseline. They don't wake up wondering if they're good enough. They don't spend their energy justifying their desires. They don't shrink themselves to fit outdated environments. They aren't seeking permission. They are grounded in their worth. They are clear on their standards. They are generous, not because they're trying to earn approval, but because they live in overflow. Meeting that version of you means tuning into what they know and how they navigate the world. It means acting as if you're already them, not pretending, not performing, but practicing. This isn't about creating a fictional character. It's about remembering who you are when you're not performing for love, approval, or safety. It's about stripping away the layers of conditioning that told you to be realistic, to stay small, to aim for what's predictable. Your future self has already let that go. They are not reckless, but they are bold. They are not reckless, but they are done asking for guarantees before moving forward. When you begin to ask what your future self would do, everything starts to shift. You begin to make decisions with more clarity. You stop hesitating. You let go of patterns that drain you, and you start aligning your life with someone who has already claimed what you've been taught to only hope for. This process requires presence. You cannot meet your future self if you are constantly rehearsing the past. You must be willing to disrupt the thought loops that keep you anchored in doubt, fear, or regret. You must stop using your current circumstances as the evidence of what's possible. The evidence comes after the embodiment, not before. You don't wait for external confirmation before stepping into a new identity. You decide to be that version of yourself now, even when it feels like a stretch. That's how the shift begins, not with proof, but with faith. Not blind faith, but embodied faith. Faith that the version of you who has it all isn't waiting at the finish line. They're waiting for you to choose them now. You meet your future self through choice. Every time you raise your standards, every time you choose peace over chaos, every time you act from abundance rather than fear, you come closer to them. They don't live in some far-off timeline. They exist in the here and now, accessed through alignment. Think of identity as a frequency. You've been tuned to one channel your whole life, one that matches the beliefs you were given, the environment you adapted to, the limitations you once accepted. But there are infinite channels, and the one your future self broadcasts on is available the moment you decide to stop settling for static. To embody this version of you, you must go beyond visualization and into integration. Yes, imagine them, picture how they walk, talk, dress, think, move, but then take it further. Speak how they would speak. Hold boundaries the way they would. Say yes and no with the decisiveness they embody. Invest in yourself as they would, without over-explaining or seeking validation. Choose habits and routines not out of guilt, but from a sense of self-respect. These are not empty exercises, they are recalibrations. They begin to close the gap between the energy you've been carrying and the energy that belongs to the life you want. At first, it might feel like you're faking it. That's not because you're being inauthentic, it's because you're unfamiliar with your own power. You're stepping into new territory where your nervous system hasn't caught up yet. But the more you act in alignment with your future self, the more natural it becomes. You build evidence, you gain trust, and eventually, you stop reaching for that identity like it's outside of you. You become it, quietly, fully, without needing applause. Not because life is now perfect, but because you're no longer performing as someone less than who you are. Meeting your future self isn't a one-time exercise. It's a daily decision. It's choosing to remember over and over that you are not your fear, your past, your current limitations, or anyone else's expectations. You are the author of your identity, and the future self you desire to become is already holding the pen. They are inviting you to write a new story, one where you lead, you rise, you receive, and you thrive. But they can't walk this path for you. They can only show you what's possible. The rest is up to you. When you begin to meet your future self consistently, something powerful happens. You stop trying to force outcomes and start living from inevitability. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop performing and start embodying. And your world begins to rearrange itself, not because of magic, but because you've become someone who naturally creates what they used to only wish for. That is the power of identity, and that is the beginning of everything. Chapter 6. The Mirror Principle. Life is always reflecting you back to yourself. That's the essence of the mirror principle. It is not some vague spiritual idea, but a deeply practical truth. Your external reality is a direct reflection of your internal identity. What you see in your relationships, your bank account, your body, your environment, your opportunities, they are all mirroring the beliefs you hold, the standards you accept, the choices you make, and the version of yourself you have chosen to live as. It isn't about blame, it's about responsibility. Because once you understand that your life is a mirror, you stop trying to change the reflection and begin changing the source. The mirror never lies, but it also never judges. It simply reflects. If your life feels chaotic, stagnant, unfulfilling, or misaligned, it's not because life is punishing you. It's because something inside of you is still choosing that experience, consciously or unconsciously. Most people resist this idea at first. It's easier to point to circumstances, to other people, to the economy, to timing. But those are secondary. The primary force shaping your life is identity. The world responds to who you are being, not just what you want. And the more ownership you take of that truth, the more power you reclaim. The mirror principle also shows up in subtle ways. If you constantly attract people who don't respect your boundaries, it's a reflection of where you've abandoned them yourself. If you feel underappreciated in your work, it might be showing you where you've undervalued your own contribution. If you keep encountering situations that make you feel small, perhaps it's because your inner narrative still tells you that shrinking keeps you safe. The mirror doesn't only reflect your conscious desires. It reflects your subconscious commitments. It shows you what you truly believe you deserve, even when you say otherwise. This is not about shame. It's about awakening. When you see life as a mirror, you can finally stop chasing external change and start initiating internal shifts. You begin to ask more powerful questions. Instead of "Why does this keep happening to me?" you ask, "What part of me keeps saying yes to this?" Instead of "When will things get better?" you ask, "Who would I need to become for better to feel normal?" These questions move you from victim to creator. They pull you out of the loop of repeating and into the space of reinventing. The mirror also responds to energy. You may say you want abundance, love, freedom, or peace, but if your energy is rooted in fear, urgency, doubt, or control, the mirror will reflect that. It doesn't care about your words, it reflects your frequency. That's why you can't just think your way into a new life. You have to feel your way into it. You have to embody the emotional state of your future self before the external world catches up. That means practicing joy even before the success shows up. That means feeling worthy even when no one is watching. That means choosing gratitude in moments of uncertainty, not as performance, but as alignment. The mirror is not always immediate. Sometimes life delays the reflection, not as punishment, but as a test of integrity. It asks, will you keep being the person you've chosen to become, even when the outside world hasn't validated it yet? That's where most people slip. They revert. They abandon their new identity too soon because the mirror hasn't confirmed it fast enough. But that's not how transformation works. The mirror doesn't reflect your wishes, it reflects your convictions. When your identity is unwavering, reality has no choice but to adjust. This is where self-trust becomes essential. You must trust that what you're embodying today will show up in your external world in due time. You must trust that every thought, every boundary, every standard, every action taken from alignment is reshaping the mirror. And that means you stop seeking immediate evidence. You stop living in reaction. You start living in creation. You lead with identity, not circumstance. From where you become so consistent in who you are that the mirror has to catch up. It's also important to remember that the mirror reflects both your shadow and your light. Many people only focus on what's wrong when they use this principle. They dissect every struggle and pain looking for the lesson. But your wins are mirrors too. Your joy is a reflection. Your progress is a reflection. The people who celebrate you, support you, and love you deeply, they are all mirrors of the energy you've been brave enough to hold. So don't just analyze the hard moments. Celebrate the reflections that confirm you are rising. The mirror principle can feel confronting, but it is ultimately liberating. Because if your identity created the results you have now, then a new identity can create completely different results. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is final. The mirror changes the moment you do. You don't have to fight your life anymore. You don't have to chase validation. You simply have to align with the version of you who lives the life you desire and let the mirror do its job. There will be days when it feels like nothing is shifting. That's part of the process. Mirrors don't always reflect instantly. But that doesn't mean your work is pointless. The shift is happening beneath the surface. Every time you hold a boundary, every time you choose alignment over approval, every time you silence the voice of doubt and move forward anyway, you are changing the image. And the moment that change becomes fully integrated, the reflection becomes undeniable. So, if your current reality doesn't match your vision, don't fight it, study it. Let it reveal where you still need to evolve. Let it guide you back to your power, and then, with intention and clarity, begin to reflect something new, not by force, but by being. Because when you become the person who is no longer available for chaos, for scarcity, for compromise, for smallness, life has no choice but to mirror that back. You are the source, your reality is the reflection, and the moment you stop trying to adjust the mirror and start adjusting yourself, everything changes. That's not wishful thinking. That's the law. And once you live by it, you'll never waste energy on the surface again. Chapter 7. The Script You've Been Living. Every day, whether you realize it or not, you are playing out a script. Not one you consciously wrote, but one that has been shaped by your upbringing, your culture, your past experiences, and the environment you adapted to. This script determines how you respond to challenges, how you receive success, how you relate to others, and how you see yourself. It dictates what you believe is possible, what you believe you deserve, and how far you allow yourself to go. And until you become aware of this script, it continues to run your life by default, quietly directing your decisions while convincing you that this is simply who you are. The most dangerous scripts are not the loud, obvious ones. They are the subtle, internal narratives that go unquestioned, the ones that say you must work twice as hard to earn half as much, the ones that whisper you're too much or not enough, the ones that tell you to avoid attention, to keep the peace, to not get your hopes up. These scripts don't sound like commands. They sound like common sense, like being realistic, like keeping yourself safe. And yet, they are nothing more than echoes from the past that you've accepted as your identity. Most people never question the script. They simply follow it, even when it leads them into burnout, resentment, or emotional numbness. They repeat the same relational dynamics, the same financial patterns, the same emotional reactions. They set goals, take action, and then quietly self-sabotage when they get too close to success, because it doesn't match the narrative they've internalized. It's not because they're weak or unmotivated, it's because the script says, this isn't for people like you, and the identity listens. And as long as that script remains unexamined, the identity remains unchanged. You may have built entire aspects of your life around a script that isn't yours. You may have chosen a career because the script said stability mattered more than joy. You may have stayed in relationships because the script warned you that being alone was worse than being unfulfilled. You may have silenced your voice because the script taught you that being liked was safer than being real. These decisions didn't come from your truth. They came from a story written in a time when survival mattered more than authenticity. But survival is not the same as expansion. And the identity shift requires that you stop living reactively and start choosing consciously. That begins with examining the script. Where did it come from? Who benefits from you staying inside it? What beliefs are baked into it that no longer serve you? When you start asking these questions, you'll often feel resistance. That's a good sign. It means you're stepping outside the programming. It means you're no longer willing to mistake familiarity for truth. Some scripts are rooted in family. You were praised for being the responsible one, the strong one, the helper, so you became someone who never asked for help, who carried more than your share, who equated exhaustion with love. Some scripts are shaped by culture. You were taught that success looks a certain way, that worth is measured by productivity, that self-sacrifice is noble, so you pushed yourself to perform, to meet expectations you never agreed to. Other scripts come from trauma. Moments when your nervous system learned that playing small or being invisible was safer than being seen. These scripts are not your fault, but they are your responsibility. To rewrite the script, you must first give yourself permission to question it. This requires honesty. It requires you to admit that parts of your life were built on unconscious agreements. It means acknowledging that some of the values you've been living by were never really yours. It's not easy. Letting go of a familiar script feels like stepping into the unknown. but what you fear losing is often the version of yourself you've outgrown. When you begin to write a new script, you are no longer acting from a place of obligation. You're acting from intention. You start choosing based on who you want to become, not who you've been told you should be. Your values shift, your priorities realign, your language changes. You stop saying "I have to" and start saying "I choose to." You stop performing and start embodying. You begin to live as if your worth is non-negotiable, because it is. This new script is not about perfection. It's not about reinventing every aspect of your life overnight. It's about making one aligned choice at a time. It's about catching yourself when you fall into the old pattern and choosing again. It's about building self-trust through consistency. You start small. You tell the truth in conversations where you used to stay silent. You say no to opportunities that don't align, even if they look impressive. You invest in your growth without needing to justify it. You take up space without apologizing. Over time, these choices compound, and one day you wake up and realize you're no longer playing a role. You're living as yourself. The people around you may not understand this shift at first. They may still expect you to follow the old script. Some may feel threatened by your growth. Others may project their own unhealed patterns onto your evolution. That's not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for staying small to make others comfortable. Your only responsibility is to stay aligned with the truth of who you are becoming. And if that requires rewriting your entire narrative, so be it. You are not here to live someone else's story. The script you've been living has served its purpose. It helped you survive. It gave you structure. It helped you belong. But it's not meant to define your future. You get to choose a new story. One where your power is not conditional, your worth is not earned, and your identity is not confined by the past. You are the author now, and every moment is a blank page. The question is no longer, what does the old script allow? The question is, what does the next version of me require? Answer that honestly, live that answer consistently, and you will begin to experience the kind of freedom most people never taste. Not because the world outside you changed, but because you finally stopped waiting for permission and chose to live as the person who writes their own line. Chapter 8. The Power of Self-Permission. There is a silent contract many of us carry, passed down without words and reinforced through years of conditioning. Wait your turn, earn your worth, ask for approval, and only then will you be allowed to want more, to speak louder, to take up space, to choose differently. We live under the illusion that permission must come from outside of us, from a parent, a mentor, a boss, a partner, a system, or some invisible authority that says, now you're ready, now you're enough, now you're allowed. But that permission rarely arrives. And when it does, it often comes with strings attached, conditions that require you to stay small, stay humble, stay grateful, stay manageable. It's only when you realize that no one is coming to give you permission that you begin to understand where your true power lives. The power of self-permission is radical because it breaks the entire game. It says you don't have to earn your right to evolve. You don't have to justify your desires. You don't need to wait for evidence before you trust yourself. You get to choose. You get to want what you want, say what you mean, do what feels aligned, not because someone else approves, but because you have decided your own approval is enough. And that shift changes everything. Most people spend their lives negotiating with the expectations of others. They dilute their truth to avoid conflict. They over-explain their decisions in search of validation. They hold back their full selves because they're afraid of being misunderstood, judged, or abandoned. And in doing so, they train themselves to believe that their power is unsafe, that their bigness is too much, that their clarity must be softened, that their dreams need permission slips. This is how brilliance gets dimmed, not by failure, but by hesitation. Self-permission is the undoing of that hesitation. It is the moment you stop asking, Is it okay if I become more? And start declaring, I am already more. It's not defiance for the sake of rebellion. It's alignment for the sake of integrity. It's the recognition that you cannot live your full truth while waiting for everyone else to be comfortable with it. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be honest. You are here to be free. And freedom begins when you stop apologizing for your expansion. Giving yourself permission doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop abandoning yourself to keep them comfortable. It means you stop editing your expression so that others don't feel insecure in your presence. It means you recognize that your authenticity may challenge the status quo, and that's not only okay, it's necessary. Evolution always disrupts the familiar, and the moment you give yourself permission to evolve without apology, you start to attract people, opportunities, and environments that are aligned with who you really are, not who you've been pretending to be. This is also where clarity begins to replace confusion. Many people feel lost not because they lack direction, but because they've been suppressing what they already know. They feel foggy because they've spent years tuning out their own voice in favor of external opinions. But when you give yourself permission to trust your instincts, to move toward what lights you up, to take action without waiting for applause, the fog begins to lift. You remember that you've always known, you just talked yourself out of it to stay safe. Self-permission is also the foundation of sustainable confidence. Not the kind of confidence that relies on results or recognition, but the kind that says, I believe in my capacity even when no one else sees it yet. It's the kind of grounded self-certainty that doesn't need to be loud, but is undeniably steady. When you've given yourself permission to take the leap, to ask for more, to receive without guilt, you stop needing constant reassurance. You stop needing the outside world to validate your identity. You become your own source of safety. There will be moments when this feels lonely, when your growth triggers the insecurity of others, when your choices confuse people who are still living by the old rules, when your decisiveness is mistaken for arrogance. But the loneliness of self-permission is temporary. The fulfillment that follows it is lasting, because you will look at your life and know with complete certainty that it is yours, not a watered-down version shaped by obligation, not a collection of compromises wrapped in the illusion of practicality, but a life authored by the part of you that refuses to wait for approval to live fully. This permission must be practiced daily. It's not a one-time decision. It's in the moments when you feel the urge to shrink your opinion and choose instead to speak clearly. It's in the moments when you want to say yes out of guilt but choose no from alignment. It's in the moments when you make a choice others don't understand and you let them misunderstand you without needing to fix it. Each of these moments is a declaration. I trust myself. I am enough. I decide. These moments create a new identity, one rooted not in performance but in ownership. You are the only one who can live your truth. You are the only one who can feel your alignment. You are the only one who can know when it's time to evolve, when it's time to leap, when it's time to let go. And because you are the only one who can know, you are also the only one who can grant yourself the permission to follow through. No one else can feel the fire inside you. No one else can see the vision that keeps tugging at your soul. That vision shows you, and it's not a coincidence. It's a calling. But that calling remains silent until you give yourself the authority to answer it. Permission is not a gate. It is not something you wait to be given. It is a key you already hold. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are simply one decision away from becoming the version of yourself who leads instead of waits, who acts instead of doubts, who trusts instead of fears. And that decision, repeated often enough, becomes a life lived in full expression. The world does not give you permission to rise, you do. And when you do, everything around you begins to shift, not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped waiting for it to approve your becoming. Chapter 9. Becoming unavailable for less. There is a moment in personal evolution when you no longer negotiate with the old version of yourself. You no longer explain your worth, argue with your doubts, or try to make others comfortable with your rise. You simply become unavailable for anything that does not reflect the identity you've chosen to live in. This is not arrogance, it is self-respect. It is the point in your transformation when you stop being available for half-lived lives, half-hearted effort, or halfway dreams. You no longer entertain conversations that drain you. You no longer say yes when you mean no. You no longer delay your growth to appease others. You draw an energetic and practical line in the sand and decide firmly, unapologetically, and finally, that less is no longer an option. For much of your life, you may have been taught to compromise, to accept crumbs and call it a meal, to see sacrifice as noble and self-denial as maturity. You may have grown up in an environment where tolerating discomfort was a virtue, where being low maintenance was praised, where not asking for much was considered polite. So you learned to accept less than you needed, less than you desired, less than you deserved. And somewhere along the way that became your normal. You called it being easygoing, being grateful, being grounded, but what it really was, if you're honest, was fear of claiming more. Becoming unavailable for less starts by telling the truth about what you've been tolerating. It's uncomfortable at first because you have to admit that some of the things you've allowed were never aligned with your highest self. The relationship that never fulfilled you, the job that paid the bills but robbed your soul, the habits that kept you stagnant, the conversations that revolved around lack, the versions of success you chased to feel safe but that never felt satisfying. You tolerated these things because they were familiar, and familiarity has a seductive way of convincing you it's enough. But there's a cost to living in tolerance mode. There's a fatigue that comes from betraying yourself in small ways every day. There's a weight you carry when you smile through dissatisfaction. There's an invisible drain that happens when your actions don't match your truth. And the longer you stay available for less, the harder it becomes to believe in more. You start to shrink your vision to fit your reality instead of expanding your identity to match your vision. Becoming unavailable for less doesn't mean walking away from everything and starting over. It means elevating your standards, not from ego, but from clarity. It means getting clear on what the highest version of you would no longer tolerate. It means deciding that your energy is too sacred for chaos, that your time is too valuable for distraction, and that your dreams are too important to be managed by fear. You stop seeing your desires as excessive and you start seeing them as instructions. You stop arguing for your limitations and you start living by your possibilities. This shift begins in your mind. You start observing your internal dialogue and catching the moments when you justify staying small. You begin to notice the places where your language has been trained by scarcity. Phrases like, "I guess this is good enough," or "It's not that bad," or "At least it's something." These are the thoughts that keep you available for less. These are the narratives that lower your frequency and create patterns of settling. To shift them, you have to be intentional. You begin to replace them with statements that affirm your new identity. I am worthy of more. This doesn't match my standard. I trust that better is not only possible, but inevitable. Then the work moves into your behaviors. You begin to align your actions with your new standards. You don't just talk about change, you embody it. You stop answering messages that feel transactional. You walk away from opportunities that don't light you up. You rest when your body asks, not when the world allows. You show up as someone who expects alignment, not someone who tolerates dysfunction. And when fear shows up, and it will, you hold your new standard. Because the only way a new identity becomes real is through consistency. One of the most powerful things you can do during this shift is observe who and what starts to fall away. Not everything and not everyone can come with you to your next level. Some people are only aligned with the version of you who accepted less. When you stop performing for love, approval, or connection, those who were only drawn to your performance will fade. This is not a loss. It is an affirmation. Let it be confirmation that your frequency is rising. Let it remind you that you are no longer available for relationships rooted in convenience or codependency. You are now available for depth, truth, reciprocity, and alignment. The same applies to your goals. When you become unavailable for less, you stop chasing goals out of fear. You no longer pursue success because you're trying to escape something. You begin creating from a place of vision, not validation. You choose goals that feel alive in your body, not just logical on paper. And because you're acting from alignment, you no longer need to be micromanaged by pressure. You trust yourself to move with power and presence. This is not an overnight shift. It is a practice. You will be tested. Old patterns will try to re-enter disguised as temporary comfort. Familiar dynamics will resurface, inviting you to step back into the energy of tolerance. You may even be tempted to settle when the new standard feels too quiet, too uncertain, too risky. But the difference is, now you know. You know what less feels like. You know what it costs. And you know that going back isn't an option you're willing to choose. Becoming unavailable for less is an act of deep self-love. It is the moment you stop negotiating your worth and start living as if your desires matter, because they do. It's the moment you stop managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own truth. It's the decision to no longer wait to be chosen, but to choose yourself fully. Not with arrogance, but with grounded, non-negotiable clarity. You are not here to prove you can endure more. You are here to remember that you are worthy of better. And once you fully embrace that, you'll find that life begins to meet you at your new standard, not because the world changed, but because you did. Chapter 10. From Habits to Identity. Much has been said about the power of habits. In the world of self-development, habits are celebrated as the building blocks of success. Morning routines, workout plans, productivity hacks, everywhere you turn, someone is offering a new strategy to fine-tune your behavior. And while habits do matter, what matters even more is the identity from which those habits emerge. Because a habit is only as strong as the story you believe about who you are. When you rely on discipline alone to force yourself into new behavior, you may get temporary results. But when you embody the identity of someone who simply lives that way, the behavior becomes automatic. It stops being something you do and becomes part of who you are. People often start with the surface. I want to eat healthier. I want to wake up earlier. I want to be more consistent. But they rarely ask the deeper question, who is the version of me for whom these things are normal? Instead, they try to tack on new behaviors to an old identity. They try to install high-level habits while still identifying as someone who struggles, someone who quits, someone who can't trust themselves to follow through. And then they wonder why it feels like a constant uphill battle. The truth is that habits built on an unstable identity don't last. The foundation crumbles the moment life gets hard. But when you shift your self-image first, the habits naturally align with the person you've chosen to be. If you see yourself as a disorganized person, it won't matter how many planners you buy, you'll still create chaos. If you see yourself as someone who always struggles with money, you'll find ways to spend or sabotage no matter how much you earn. If you see yourself as undisciplined, every new routine will feel like a battle. On the other hand, when you begin to see yourself as someone who respects their body, you won't have to force yourself to move. When you embody the identity of someone who honors their time, boundaries will become second nature. When you see yourself as someone who follows through, consistency stops being something you chase and becomes something you live. The goal is not to obsess over habits, but to let your identity inform them. This begins by asking a simple but powerful question. What would the version of me who already has the life I desire be doing daily? Not occasionally, not when they feel motivated. Every day. How do they start their morning? How do they handle stress? How do they talk to themselves? What do they consume emotionally and mentally? When you answer these questions honestly, you begin to see the gap not just in your habits, but but in your self-concept. And that gap is not something to be judged. It's something to be bridged through intention. This is not about creating a rigid life where you follow rules like a robot. This is about creating alignment. When you live from identity, habits become expressions of your truth, not obligations. They stop feeling like chores and start feeling like rituals. And the more you show up as this future version of yourself, the more you reinforce the identity behind the behavior. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you cast a vote for the person you're becoming. And those votes compound. They build trust, they create momentum, they establish a new emotional baseline where success doesn't feel foreign, it feels familiar. Many people try to white-knuckle their way into transformation through willpower alone. They rely on motivation, which fades, or pressure, which burns out. But what if it didn't have to be so hard? What if the struggle comes not from the effort itself, but from the misalignment between action and identity? Imagine how differently your choices would feel if you were simply being who you truly are, rather than trying to prove something. That's what identity-based living offers. It removes the internal friction that makes change feel like punishment. It turns your habits into an extension of your standard. To truly make this shift, you must be willing to let go of the comfort of contradiction. You must stop saying you want one thing while embodying the opposite. You must stop identifying with the version of you who is always trying to change, and instead start living as the one who has already changed. This doesn't mean pretending. It means choosing. Choosing to hold a higher standard. Choosing to no longer identify with struggle as your default. Choosing to see yourself as someone whose actions are not sporadic efforts, but daily evidence of alignment. This is not an overnight transformation. There'll be days when you slip, days when the old identity whispers louder than the new one. That's part of the process. What matters is not perfection, it's persistence. The question is not whether you'll fall. It's whether you'll get back up as the person you've committed to being. Will you recommit to the new identity, not just the new habit? Will you choose self-respect over self-judgment? Because every time you do, you strengthen the neural and emotional pathways that tell your mind and body, this is who we are now. Identity-based habits don't just change what you do, they change how you feel about yourself. You start to trust your own consistency. You no longer need to rely on external accountability to stay aligned. Your standards become internal. Your alignment becomes non-negotiable. You start making decisions not from a place of pressure, but from a place of power. That is the shift that makes results sustainable. Not just because you've built a routine, but because you've become the kind of person who honors it. When you stop focusing on what you're doing and start focusing on who you're being, everything begins to click into place. Habits no longer feel like effort, they feel like identity. You're no longer forcing change from the outside in. You're creating transformation from the inside out. And as your identity stabilizes, so does your reality. You stop falling into the cycles of inconsistency that once defined you. You stop chasing temporary fixes. You become solid, clear, aligned, and that version of you doesn't have to struggle to maintain momentum. They simply live in congruence with the life they've already decided is theirs. Chapter 11. Acting as if isn't pretending. There's a powerful shift that occurs when you stop waiting to feel ready and instead begin acting as if you already are. To many, this sounds like a form of make-believe, a performance with no substance behind it. But the truth is, acting as if is not about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about aligning your present actions with your future identity. It is the bridge between who you have been and who you are becoming. When done with integrity and intention, it becomes one of the most transformative tools available to you, not because it fools others, but because it teaches your mind and body to embody a new standard before the evidence has arrived. Most people misunderstand this concept. They imagine it means faking confidence or mimicking the behaviors of someone they aspire to be. They put on a mask, rehearse affirmations they don't believe, and go through the motions without truly changing the core of how they see themselves. Inevitably, this disconnect catches up with them. They feel inauthentic, exhausted from the performance, and quietly retreat back into the identity they were trying to escape. This happens not because the concept is flawed, but because the intention was superficial. Acting as if is not about trying to convince the world. It's about leading your nervous system and emotional reality into a new way of being. You don't need to fake anything. You only need to remember that the version of you who has what you want already exists in potential. You're not acting as someone else. You're practicing being the real you without the fear, without the doubt, without the old patterns that kept you playing small. Think of it as emotional rehearsal. Just as athletes train their bodies and performers train their voice or movement, you are training your nervous system to become familiar with the feelings of success, alignment, and abundance before those conditions appear externally. And when your body feels safe in those emotions, your actions begin to follow. Acting as if is not about being unrealistic. It's about being energetically aligned. It's the difference between someone who walks into a room apologizing for their presence and someone who walks in knowing they belong. Nothing external may have changed between the two versions, but the energy tells a different story. The former is seeking permission. The latter has given it to themselves. This is the real work of stepping into identity. It's about removing the conditions you've attached to your worth and deciding that you get to be that version now, not later. Of course, the ego resists this. It wants to stay tethered to proof. It says you can't feel confident until you have the results. You can't feel secure until you see the money. You can't feel powerful until you've earned some title. But all of that is backward. If you wait until life gives you permission to feel those things, you'll be waiting forever. The real secret is that life responds to how you show up. It reflects the energy you embody. And when you begin to act from the identity of someone who already has it, you begin to attract the experiences, people, and outcomes that match it. This is not manifestation through wishful thinking. It's transformation through conscious embodiment. If you want to be a leader, start making decisions from clarity and conviction. If you want to feel abundant, start treating your time, energy, and environment with reverence. If you want to feel powerful, stop outsourcing your authority and start honoring your intuition. These are not small things. They are signals. They are acts of identity that communicate to the world and to yourself that you are no longer waiting to become. You already are. The reason this works is because identity is not based on external status. It's based on internal alignment. When you act as if, you are not waiting for life to change before you show up differently. You are changing how you show up, which naturally changes what life mirrors back. That means you stop looking for permission to feel a certain way and start becoming the source of those feelings. It doesn't mean you lie to yourself or deny your circumstance. It means you decide that your circumstances are not the only truth, that there's another reality available, one that you step into by embodying its emotional and behavioral frequency now. You'll know you're doing this with integrity when it feels like a quiet shift, not a performance. There's no need to announce it. You don't have to post about it or prove it to others. It's internal. It's a decision you carry in your posture, your tone, your gaze, your actions. You're not waiting for applause or reassurance. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're simply choosing to live as the person you've already decided to become. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable at first. You may feel like an imposter, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're stepping out of the emotional patterns your nervous system is used to. That discomfort isn't a sign to stop. It's a sign that you're expanding. Most people feel this tension and assume they're being fake. But being fake is when you pretend to be someone you're not. Acting as if, when done correctly, is stepping into who you are without the fear that's been clouding your truth. It's choosing trust over doubt. It's choosing embodiment over hesitation. With practice, this becomes your new normal. What once felt like a stretch becomes your baseline. The energy you used to access only in fleeting moments of confidence becomes how you carry yourself naturally. The behaviors you once forced become second nature. The goals that once felt far off start to manifest. Not because you wished them into existence, but because you stopped pushing them away by acting from lack. You became a match, and life responded. The more you lead with this identity, the more stable it becomes. And from that stability, you make different choices. You stop chasing, you stop proving, you stop settling. You become unavailable for anything that contradicts the self-immersion you've cultivated. You live from vision, not history, from alignment, not performance. And that changes everything. Acting as if isn't pretending, it's practicing. It's embodying. It's remembering who you are and choosing to live as that version now. Not someday, not eventually, but today. Because today is the only place identity lives. And every time you choose to act from your future self, that future comes closer, not as a possibility, but as a reality. Chapter 12. Emotions as Evidence. In a world that constantly demands tangible proof, measurable progress, and logical explanations, emotions are often treated as unreliable, secondary, or even dangerous. We're told not to be too emotional, not to let feelings cloud our judgment, not to base decisions on what can't be calculated. Yet in the process of overvaluing logic, many people lose access to one of the most powerful tools of transformation: emotional alignment. Emotions are not distractions or liabilities. They are data. They are feedback from your inner world, showing you exactly how in or out of alignment you are with the version of yourself you've chosen to become. When understood and respected, emotions become your most immediate evidence of whether you are embodying your new identity or defaulting to an old one. The identity shift is not simply about what you do, it's about how you feel while doing it. You can adopt new habits, say the right affirmations, follow every strategy, and still sabotage your growth if your emotional state is stuck in scarcity, doubt, or unworthiness. That's because your emotional baseline holds more influence over your outcomes than any checklist ever could. You're not just creating through action, you're creating through energy, and energy is rooted in emotion. You can't trick your nervous system. You might be able to talk like your future self, but if you still feel like a fraud on the inside, the results won't last. Eventually, your reality will reflect the emotional truth you haven't yet faced. That's why learning to read your emotions is crucial, not to control or suppress them, but to use them as signals. Every emotion you feel carries a message. Frustration might be telling you where you're still operating from misalignment. Anxiety could be a sign you're trying to control an outcome rather than trust yourself. Jealousy isn't proof you're broken. It's a signal pointing you towards something you deeply desire, but don't yet believe is available to you. On the other hand, peace is evidence of internal congruence. Excitement is a green light from your intuition. Confidence isn't always loud, but when it's real, it comes with a calm certainty that needs no justification. This doesn't mean you have to feel good all the time. Emotional mastery isn't about being perpetually happy. It's about becoming emotionally honest. It's about understanding that your emotions are offering real-time feedback on your identity. Are you showing up as the version of you who already has it all? Or are you still carrying the emotional frequency of someone who doubts it's possible? The answer is not in your goals or your actions, it's in your state. Because when you feel in alignment, you don't have to force momentum, it flows. When you feel worthy, you don't chase outcomes, you receive them. Your emotions are also powerful tools for course correction. Most people ignore their emotional discomfort until it becomes unbearable, then react impulsively. But if you tune in sooner, you can shift with intention rather than panic. You can notice when resentment starts to build and ask yourself what boundary you've allowed to be crossed. You can notice when dread creeps into your work and ask if you're still in alignment with your purpose or just going through the motions. You can notice when you're exhausted, not because you're working too hard, but because you're working from a place of fear instead of flow. Emotional evidence is often subtle, which is why stillness is essential. When you never slow down, you lose the ability to hear what your emotions are trying to tell you. You confuse numbness for peace and busyness for productivity. But stillness doesn't mean inaction. It means space. Space to feel, space to listen, space to recalibrate. In that space, you begin to develop emotional fluency. You stop labeling emotions as good or bad and start recognizing them as information. And the more fluently you can read your emotions, the more quickly you can shift your identity when needed. This is where embodiment becomes real. It's not about trying to feel a certain way by forcing positivity. It's about creating the internal environment that naturally produces the feelings you want to live in. That might mean changing how you speak to yourself. It might mean letting go of relationships that keep pulling you into emotional survival. It might mean choosing a slower path that honors your nervous system, instead of chasing fast success that leaves you disconnected. Whatever the method, the goal is the same: to create emotional alignment between your current state and your future identity. You can also use emotional evidence as a guide when making decisions. So often, people look to others for advice or search for certainty in logic. But your body knows. Your emotions know. If a decision feels expansive, even if it's scary, it's often a signal that you're moving toward alignment. If a decision feels heavy or contracted, even if it looks good on paper, it might be pulling you further from your truth. Learning to trust these signals is part of reclaiming your power. It means honoring your internal guidance more than external noise. This requires practice, especially if you've spent years disconnecting from your emotional reality. You might second-guess yourself. You might feel unsure about what your emotions are telling you. That's okay. Start where you are. Start by naming your feelings without judgment. Start by noticing what triggers certain responses. Start by asking yourself what a specific emotion might be trying to teach you. Over time, you'll build emotional muscle. You'll gain clarity, and you'll begin to make decisions not just from thought, but from truth. Emotions are not obstacles on the path of transformation. They are the path. They are your compass. They show you where your current identity lives and whether it's in sync with your future self. When you feel consistently aligned, joyful, powerful, and grounded, that's not just a mood, it's evidence. It means your internal state is matching the identity you've been working to embody. It means the shift is real, even if the results haven't fully caught up yet. Let your emotions be the metric. Not just the numbers, not just the milestones. Let how you feel become your primary measure of progress. Because when you master your emotional state, you become unshakable. You no longer need life to cooperate in order to stay in alignment. You create alignment from within, and the world begins to move accordingly. You don't need proof that you've changed. You don't need to wait for external validation. Your emotions will always tell you first. Learn to trust them. Learn to use them. Because they are not just a reflection of your identity, they are the proof that the shift is already happening. Chapter 13, Environment is Identity Feedback. Look around your life right now. Take in your surroundings, the people you spend time with, the conversations you entertain, the places you frequent, the spaces you occupy, and the energy that fills them. What you see is not random. It's not accidental. It's a reflection. Your environment is giving you constant feedback about the identity you are currently living from. It is one of the most honest mirrors you have. It will show you what you truly believe you deserve, what you've normalized, and what you're still allowing. If you want to shift your identity, but everything around you remains the same, you're working against gravity. Because while change begins within, it is reinforced or resisted by what surrounds you. The people in your life are not just companions, they are co-creators of your energetic world. If you're surrounded by people who live in fear, who diminish their own power, who mock ambition or retreat into cynicism, that energy seeps into your psyche whether you intend it to or not. You begin to recalibrate your standards to maintain harmony. You start dimming your desires to avoid friction. You hold back your truth to avoid disrupting the emotional contracts that keep those relationships comfortable. This is not about blame, it's about awareness. The version of you who has it all does not shrink to make others feel safe. They surround themselves with those who expand their vision, not those who dilute it. This doesn't mean you need to cut everyone out of your life, but it does mean you need to become hyper-conscious of energetic influence. Every conversation, every interaction, every space carries a frequency, and you are always tuning to something. You can either tune in to the energy of growth, abundance, and alignment, or you can stay plugged into the frequency of scarcity, drama, and resistance. Your identity is shaped not just by who you are, but by who you are around. The more you immerse yourself in environments that reflect your future self, the more naturally you begin to think, feel, and act as them. Environment isn't just people, it's everything you allow into your world. It's the content you consume, the ideas you expose yourself to, the physical spaces you occupy. Is your environment inspiring you to rise or keeping you numb? Does your space reflect order, clarity, and peace, or chaos, confusion, and neglect? Is your home a sanctuary or a place where your dreams go to sleep? These are not superficial questions, they are foundational. Because your surroundings shape your emotional state, and your emotional state shapes your identity. You can't expect to feel expansive if your environment constantly triggers contraction. Sometimes the biggest shift you can make isn't internal, it's rearranging the external to match what you've already decided internally. This might mean decluttering your space to signal a fresh chapter. It might mean upgrading the quality of what you allow into your mind and body. It might mean changing the kinds of conversations you allow yourself to have. It might mean traveling, relocating, or simply changing your daily routine so it no longer reflects an outdated version of you. These aren't empty gestures, they are declarations. Every change you make in your environment is a statement to yourself. This is who I am now. It's easy to overlook the influence of environment because we adapt to it so quickly. What was once unacceptable becomes normalized. The clutter becomes background noise. The draining relationships become habitual. The spaces that used to feel heavy become familiar. But familiarity does not equal alignment. Just because you've gotten used to something doesn't mean it serves you. Often, the greatest act of courage is not pushing harder. It's stepping back and asking what needs to be removed. Not everything in your life belongs in your next level. And some things will only reveal their misalignment once you've made a firm decision to grow. Your environment will test your commitment to your new identity. It will try to pull you back into the version of you that felt comfortable there. You'll be invited to lower your standards, to explain your boundaries, to justify your new choices. And every time you don't, every time you hold firm, you strengthen your identity. This is how you recalibrate your reality, not by forcing others to change, but by being so clear in your alignment that anything not matching it falls away. At the same time, intentionally curating your environment can accelerate your growth. When you immerse yourself in spaces that reflect the identity you are stepping into, everything begins to move faster. You feel inspired instead of obligated. You feel energized instead of drained. You feel seen without needing to perform. These spaces can be physical, like a room designed to support creativity, or a wardrobe that mirrors your confidence. Or they can be relational, mentorships, communities, partnerships that call you forward instead of holding you back. Your environment should not require you to hide parts of yourself. It should invite you to reveal more of your truth. This is especially important when you're in the middle of an identity shift. That's when you're most vulnerable to external influence. When you're shedding the old but not yet fully stabilized in the new, your environment can either anchor your growth or sabotage it. That's why many people experience rapid expansion during retreats, masterminds, or time away from their usual context. They're temporarily immersed in an environment that mirrors their future self. But the key is to make that environment permanent or at least consistent. Otherwise, you return to the old world and slowly regress back into the identity it supports. You don't need a perfect environment to begin, but you do need one that supports your becoming. This may require hard choices. It may mean having difficult conversations. It may mean walking away from dynamics you've outgrown. But the more you clear space for the new, the faster it arrives. And when you walk into a room, open your phone, sit at your desk, or engage with someone, and it all feels like a mirror of the identity you've chosen, that's when you know the shift is complete, because you're no longer managing an internal transformation alone. Your outer world has caught up. If you want to know who you are becoming, look at what you're surrounding yourself with. If the answer doesn't excite you, don't panic. Decide. Recalibrate. Choose again. You are not stuck. You are simply saturated in signals that reflect who you used to be. Change those signals, and you'll change your identity far more quickly than any affirmation or mindset trick could ever do. Because at the end of the day, transformation sticks best when it's not just in your mind. It's built into the air you breathe, the spaces you enter, and the energy you allow around you. Chapter 14. The Ego's Last Stand. There comes a moment in every transformation where the resistance doesn't just whisper, it roars. Everything you've been working toward begins to materialize, your energy begins to shift, your identity starts stabilizing in this new frequency, and just when you think you've broken through for good, the old version of you resurfaces with a vengeance. The doubts return, the habits you thought were gone creep back in. The fear feels louder, heavier, more convincing. This is not a sign that you've failed, it's a sign that you're succeeding. What you're experiencing is the ego's last stand. The ego is not evil, it's not your enemy. It's a psychological mechanism built to keep you safe, to maintain a sense of identity, to avoid change that feels threatening. Its job is to protect the familiar, and for most of your life, the familiar was tied to survival. The ego learned to associate sameness with safety, so when you begin to stretch into a new self-concept, the ego doesn't see that as growth. It sees it as danger, and it will do everything in its power to pull you back into what it knows, not because it hates you, but because it believes it's saving you. This pullback often happens at the very edge of breakthrough. It's the moment just before momentum takes hold, the moment when you're closest to embodying the new version of yourself fully. That's when the ego panics. It senses its irrelevance, it fears annihilation, and so it fights. It floods you with reasons to doubt, to hesitate, to sabotage. It reminds you of every past failure. It offers up old patterns like a buffet of comfort food. It tells you you're not ready, not deserving, not built for this. It tries to reattach you to old identities with a quiet desperation. This is not regression, it is confrontation. And it means the shift is working. You must learn to expect this part of the process. Because when you understand that resistance is part of transformation, you no longer interpret it as a reason to stop. You see it for what it is, an outdated operating system trying to survive. And your job is not to silence the ego, but to lead it, to remind it that you are safe, that change is not death, that growth is not abandonment. You speak to it like you would to a scared child, with firm reassurance. You do not argue with it, you do not collapse into it, you simply observe it, thank it for its concern, and choose differently. The ego's last stand often brings up irrational emotions. You may find yourself suddenly angry, exhausted, anxious, or overwhelmed. Not because of anything real, but because your subconscious is detoxing old energy. The identity you're leaving behind is grieving its relevance. The body is releasing patterns it's held for years. It's disorienting, even painful, but if you can sit in the discomfort without making it mean anything, you'll move through it faster. Emotional turbulence doesn't mean you're off track. Sometimes it's the strongest confirmation that you're crossing into a new energetic reality. This is also the phase where many people unconsciously create chaos. The ego wants to prove that the new identity isn't sustainable, so it orchestrates conflict. It attracts obstacles. It clouds your thinking. And if you're not grounded in your vision, you'll take the bait. You'll interpret the disruption as evidence that you should return to the old ways. But what's really happening is that your system is being tested, not to punish you, but to ask, are you really this new version of yourself, or are you still rehearsing it? How you respond in this moment determines whether the identity shift sticks or slips. The most powerful response is neutrality. You don't need to fight the ego. You don't need to prove anything. You simply stay in alignment. You keep showing up as the version of you who has already chosen the new identity. You do not seek validation. You do not explain your boundaries. You do not collapse your standards just to find short-term comfort. You trust that this tension will pass, because it always does. The ego may also try to mask itself as logic. It will create stories that sound reasonable. It will tell you that now isn't the right time, that you need more preparation, that you should wait until you're more confident, more certain, more secure. These are not intuitive whispers. They are fear in disguise. The ego doesn't care about your timing. It cares about your safety. And since your safety was once tied to staying small, it will always push back when you try to expand. The challenge is to recognize the difference between intuition and insecurity. One feels clear and grounded, even if it's challenging. The other feels frantic, repetitive, and rooted in contraction. There's nothing wrong with experiencing this pushback. Every person who has ever risen into a new level of self has encountered it. What separates those who make it through from those who retreat is their willingness to stay present through the discomfort. Not to bypass it, not to numb it, but to walk through it with eyes open and identity intact. You don't collapse into the emotion, you observe it. You move through your day while holding your standard. You take aligned action even when it feels shaky. And over time the ego quiets, not because it's gone, but because it's no longer running the show. Eventually, the new identity becomes safe, familiar, grounded. And the ego adapts. It realizes that this version of you is not a threat. It's an evolution. And when it does, the inner war ends. Not forever, but for this chapter, until the next threshold appears. Because every level of growth will require another release, another letting go, another death of an old identity. But it gets easier, not because the fear disappears, but because your relationship to it matures. You stop fearing the voice of the ego and start seeing it as a signal that you're on the right path. The ego's last stand is not your enemy. It's your initiation. It is the moment where theory becomes embodiment, where desire becomes decision, where change becomes character. You're not failing, you're crossing over. And the resistance you feel is not a block. It's the sound of the old you breaking apart. Hold your vision. Stay in integrity. Move with grace. And when the ego tries to pull you back, smile, breathe, and keep walking. Because you've already decided. And your decision, repeated through action, becomes the new foundation on which your future self will stand, unshaken, rooted, and free. Chapter 15. Imposter syndrome is a signpost. Imposter syndrome is often misunderstood as a weakness, a flaw, or an obstacle to overcome before stepping into the next version of yourself, but in truth, it is none of those things. Imposter syndrome is not a signal that you're on the wrong path. It's not proof that you're faking something. It's not a reason to slow down or shrink back. What it is, more than anything, is a signpost. It marks the boundary between who you have been and who you are becoming. It arises precisely when you are stepping outside the familiar identity you've lived inside for so long and into a reality your nervous system has not yet normalized. It is not a stop sign. It is a threshold. When you feel like an imposter, it is because you are no longer fully identified with the past version of yourself, but you haven't yet built enough emotional evidence to feel grounded in the new one. You are caught between two worlds. the one you've known and the one you've decided to live in. Your actions begin to change, your choices become bolder, your standards rise, but your inner voice has not caught up. The old programming tries to pull you back with doubts that sound like truth. It whispers that you're not qualified, not worthy, not capable. And because the identity shift is still fresh, those doubts land with weight. But what you must understand is that this tension is not a sign of fraudulence, it is proof of growth. You will never feel like an imposter when you're playing small. You will never feel like an imposter when you're repeating familiar patterns and staying within the limits of your past. Imposter syndrome doesn't show up when you're stuck. It shows up when you're expanding. It visits the person who dared to say yes to more. It lingers around the edges of the unfamiliar, waiting to see if you will retreat or hold steady. And the way you handle it defines everything. If you internalize the discomfort, you'll begin to shrink. You'll sabotage your opportunities, mute your voice, soften your impact. But if you recognize the discomfort for what it is, a natural part of identity evolution, you can breathe through it, move with it, and continue forward with grace. Imposter syndrome often comes with a sense of isolation. It makes you feel like you're the only one who doesn't belong, the only one who hasn't earned their seat, the only one pretending to know what they're doing. But the truth is, nearly everyone who's ever done something meaningful has felt it. The leaders, the visionaries, the artists, the creators, they've all had moments where the gap between their current identity and their next level felt enormous. They kept going anyway. Not because the doubt disappeared, but because they refused to let that doubt dictate who they could become. The real danger of imposter syndrome is not the emotion itself, it's the way we interpret it. We believe it means something about our readiness. We believe it's a signal to pull back. We make it mean that we're out of our depth. But what if it meant you're in exactly the right place? What if feeling like an imposter isn't a warning, but an invitation? What if it's your system's way of saying you are doing something new, something brave, something real? Don't stop now. To navigate imposter syndrome with strength, you have to remember that your identity always lags behind your vision. You will act like your future self before you feel like them. You will lead, create, speak, and build from the new energy long before it feels completely safe. And that's the work. You're not trying to erase the discomfort. You're learning how to hold it without letting it make your decisions. You show up even when the voice in your head says you're not ready. You deliver even when the doubt is loud. You keep building even when part of you wonders if the whole thing will collapse. Confidence doesn't come first. Courage does. And courage is born in moments like these. Not in the absence of fear, but in your ability to feel the fear and still stay rooted in your commitment. Eventually, the emotions catch up. Eventually, the actions repeated enough become embodied. The voice that once screamed, "You don't belong here," begins to quiet. And one day you realize you no longer feel like an imposter because you've lived your way into legitimacy. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own. One of the best things you can do during this phase is to normalize the feeling. Say it out loud, talk about it, name it. Imposter syndrome thrives in silence. It feeds on secrecy and shame. But when you speak it, when you say, "This is uncomfortable and I'm doing it anyway," you rob it of its power. You bring it into the light and remind yourself that you're not broken, you're building. And in that truth, something shifts. You stop seeing the discomfort as a reason to hide. You start seeing it as evidence that you are right on schedule. You will always be ahead of your comfort zone if you're growing. You will always have to lead yourself before the world sees you as a leader. You will always have to believe in your value before your environment fully reflects it. So let the imposter syndrome be what it is, a natural, temporary echo of an old identity. Don't panic when it shows up. Don't spiral. Just keep going. You are not faking anything. You are integrating something new. And integration takes time, repetition, and a willingness to be seen in the becoming. You are allowed to feel like an imposter and still show up in your power. You are allowed to feel unsure and still deliver with excellence. You are allowed to feel the fear and still choose expansion. This is not fraudulence. This is transformation in real time. This is what it looks like to cross the bridge from the self you've known to the self you've decided to become. And the bridge always shakes a little under your feet. That's not a flaw, that's how you're moving. So when the voice of imposter syndrome shows up, when it tells you that you're not enough, not qualified, not real, remember this: the very presence of that voice means you're in motion. It means you've left behind who you were. It means you're stepping into a reality where you no longer wait to feel ready. You lead yourself there. You embody before it's confirmed. You claim it before it's confirmed. And one day, when the dust settles, when the doubt fades, when the new identity becomes your normal, you'll look back at this version of yourself, the one who kept going despite the inner noise, and you'll know with absolute certainty that they were never an imposter. They were a pioneer. They were the proof that identity is not about what the world sees, it's about what you're willing to live into when no one else has seen it yet. Chapter 16. Upgrading the internal dialogue. If identity is the foundation of your external reality, then language is the architecture of that identity. The words you use internally, the running monologue inside your mind, are not passive commentary. They are commands. They inform your nervous system of what is safe, what is possible, and what is expected. They shape your emotions, influence your behavior, and ultimately determine what kind of life you believe is available to you. The internal dialogue you hold is the script your subconscious mind follows. If you want to truly shift into a higher version of yourself, you must upgrade the language you allow inside your mind. Most people never stop to examine the words they speak silently to themselves. They treat their thoughts as observations rather than instructions. But every "I can't," "I'm not good enough," "this always happens to me," or "who do I think I am," becomes a brick laid into the identity being built. It doesn't matter how ambitious your goals are, if the dominant voice inside your head is narrating a story of self-doubt, scarcity, or limitation. You can work harder, move faster, and check every box. But if the internal voice is misaligned with your vision, you will subconsciously block, delay, or dismantle the very things you're working for. The internal dialogue is not just noise, it is frequency. It holds an energetic charge. Your body listens to your language, your decisions are filtered through it, your emotional baseline is set by it. If the voice in your head is critical, anxious, or dismissive, it doesn't matter how positive you appear externally, your nervous system will reflect that inner climate. And because your outer world mirrors your inner world, you'll continue to encounter situations, people, and outcomes that affirm the language you've normalized within yourself. Upgrading your internal dialogue doesn't mean pretending everything is perfect or layering affirmations on top of fear. It means choosing language that aligns with your truth and reinforces the identity you are stepping into. It's not about being artificially positive, it's about being intentionally powerful. You begin to speak to yourself like someone you trust, someone you believe in, someone you value. This isn't self-help fluff, it's neurological reprogramming. The brain listens to repetition. The more often it hears empowering, aligned, grounded language, the more it rewires your beliefs to match that narrative. Changing the way you speak to yourself begins with awareness. You must slow down long enough to observe the tone and content of your thoughts. Pay attention to how you speak to yourself in moments of failure, hesitation, or uncertainty. Notice the phrases that arise when you're taking risks or receiving compliments or being challenged. Often the internal dialogue in those moments reveals the real identity you're operating from, not the one you hope for, but the one you've accepted as default. And when you notice disempowering language, don't just try to silence it, replace it. Interrupt the pattern. Choose a new phrase. Anchor a new belief. This isn't always easy at first. The old voice will sound more familiar. It may even sound more realistic. But realism is often just code for rehearsed fear. Your job is not to repeat what's familiar. It's to speak from the reality you are building. That means you begin to normalize language like "this is who I am now. I trust myself to handle this. I'm worthy of more. And even if it's new, I can learn it. These phrases aren't magic. They're reminders. And over time, those reminders become the foundation for a new internal reality. Your internal dialogue also influences how you experience discomfort. When the voice in your head tells you that struggle is a sign of failure, you'll interpret every hard moment as a reason to quit. But when your internal language affirms that growth includes resistance, you'll begin to see discomfort as part of the process. This shift in dialogue doesn't remove the challenge, but it removes the shame. And when you stop layering shame on top of effort, you move with more ease. One of the most important upgrades you can make in your internal dialogue is to shift from identity-based self-criticism to process-based self-awareness. Instead of saying, "I'm always inconsistent," you begin to say, "I didn't follow through today, but I can realign tomorrow." Instead of, "I'm not good at this," you shift to, "This is new and I'm learning." Instead of, "I mess everything up," you say, "That didn't go how I wanted, but I can extract the lesson." These are subtle shifts, but they are powerful. They remove permanence from your mistakes. They reinforce the belief that you are growing, and growth becomes much more sustainable when your internal voice supports it. The words you speak inside your mind also shape your ability to receive. If your internal dialogue is filled with suspicion, unworthiness, or hyper-independence, you'll resist the very support and abundance you say you want. You'll sabotage relationships that feel too healthy. You'll undercharge for your work. You'll delay asking for help. You'll shrink when you're celebrated. And you'll call it humility when it's really just a lack of emotional permission to receive. But when your inner language normalizes support, wealth, love, and expansion, your nervous system begins to accept them as safe. And when they feel safe, you stop blocking them. You are always speaking yourself into an identity. The question is, which one? Is your internal dialogue keeping you tied to an outdated version of yourself, or is it pulling you forward into your next level? Are you reinforcing lack or confirming abundance? Are you repeating the past or scripting your future? Your language holds the answer. And every time you choose a more empowered phrase, even if it feels unfamiliar at first, you are casting a vote for who you are becoming. This is not about perfection. You will have days where the old voice is louder. You will have moments where you default to fear. That's normal. What matters is what you do next. Will you catch the spiral early? Will you speak the truth of your identity louder than the lie of your limitation? Will you anchor yourself in language that reflects your vision, not your old wounds? If you can do that, even imperfectly, you will begin to build a new emotional and energetic baseline. And from that baseline, new results become inevitable. Your inner voice is not just commentary, it is creation. Every sentence, every phrase, every thought is building or breaking the bridge between where you are and where you want to go. You get to choose which story to reinforce. And when you choose power, when you choose alignment, when you choose truth over fear, the identity shift is no longer something you hope for. It becomes something you live. Word by word, day by day, thought by thought. Chapter 17. Collapse the timeline. Most people live inside a story where their desires, dreams, and transformations exist somewhere out there in the future. It's always someday. Someday when they've earned more, healed more, learned more, waited long enough, proven enough. The future becomes a container for everything they want, but don't yet believe they can have. So they stretch the timeline, thinking that more time will equal more readiness. They delay decisions, procrastinate on action, and tell themselves they're being patient or strategic. But the truth is, much of what we call patience is really hesitation disguised as wisdom, and much of what we call readiness is just fear looking for more time to hide. To collapse the timeline means to collapse the distance between who you are now and the version of you who already has what you want. It's not about rushing. It's not about pushing or forcing outcomes. It's about removing the illusion that time is what you need when what you actually need is alignment. When you begin to fully embody the identity of your future self now, not partially, not experimental, reality bends faster for people who live as if what they desire is already inevitable. Because when the inner world shifts, the outer world is compelled to follow. Time is not what creates transformation. Identity does. And the identity shift doesn't need a certain number of weeks, months, or years to take effect. It needs a decision. The world reflects back your frequency, not your timeline. It responds to your self-concept, not your calendar. When you believe you need more time, you unconsciously give yourself permission to delay your standards. You allow another month of tolerating what doesn't align. You allow another season of staying stuck in dynamics that no longer serve you. You push your power into the future instead of claiming it in the present. Collapsing the timeline requires that you stop waiting and start living in the energy of already. Living in already means you speak, act, decide, and move from the place of wholeness. You don't wait for validation or visible progress to show up before you raise your standard. You don't delay joy until the milestone is reached. You don't postpone your peace, your pleasure, your presence. You bring those frequencies into the now. You become the embodiment of what you're calling in, not because you're trying to manipulate the outcome, but because you've chosen to no longer place your desires on layaway. This doesn't mean bypassing the work. It doesn't mean pretending you've arrived while ignoring the gaps. It means closing the gap emotionally and energetically first so that the physical results can catch up. You lead with being, not waiting. You bring the feeling of the end result into the present moment. That's not delusion, that's creation. And it's the fastest way to bridge the distance between where you are and where you want to be. People stretch the timeline because they are afraid of claiming what they want too soon. They fear disappointment. They fear judgment. They fear failure. So they create buffer zones between desire and embodiment. They say things like, "One day I'll be ready," or "when the timing is right," without realizing that the right time never arrives on its own. It's created through decision, through clarity, through the courage to show up now as someone who is no longer available for the version of life they've already outgrown. You collapse the timeline when you stop looking at your vision as a destination and start treating it like a standard. You stop reaching for it and start operating from it. You make it the new baseline for how you think, how you feel, how you relate, how you work, and how you live. It's no longer a stretch, it's the expectation. And anything that doesn't match it becomes clearly out of resonance. You no longer debate whether something is for you. You feel the disconnect immediately because you've stopped entertaining what's not aligned with the identity you've chosen. This shift doesn't require you to change your whole life in one dramatic move. It asks you to become ruthlessly consistent with small daily decisions that reinforce your new identity. You don't have to see the whole staircase. You just have to stop standing at the bottom, convincing yourself that more time will make you braver. It won't. Bravery is built through action. Confidence is built through embodiment, and momentum is created by collapsing the illusion that anything outside of this present moment needs to change before you can fully show up. Often, the version of you who has what you want isn't doing anything drastically different. They're just doing it from a completely different energy. They're not operating from lack or scarcity or not yet. They're not waiting for external evidence before they choose alignment. They lead themselves. They choose to embody their power without needing permission or applause. And they trust that results are a natural byproduct of who they are being, not what they are chasing. The more you anchor into that energy, the more you realize that time was never the issue. You didn't need more days on the calendar. You needed more conviction. You needed more honesty about what you were tolerating. You needed to decide that waiting wasn't wisdom anymore, it was avoidance. And from that decision, everything begins to move faster. Not because you're rushing, but because the universe no longer has to guess what you're available for. Your actions become clear, your boundaries sharpen, your clarity deepens. and life starts to respond accordingly. Collapsing the timeline also means releasing the belief that struggle earns you transformation. You don't need to suffer longer to justify your breakthrough. You don't need to delay ease as a way to prove you've earned it. Worthiness is not measured by the number of setbacks you've endured. It is a choice you make every moment to stop waiting and start receiving what you've always had access to. The version of you who already has it all isn't concerned with the clock. They're too busy living in alignment to care how long it takes. And ironically, that's why it happens faster for them. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where you need to be to choose differently now. There is no time limit on transformation, but there is a cost to postponing it. Every day you wait to embody your next level is a day you reinforce the old one. Every excuse becomes another layer of distance between you and the life you've already imagined. And every moment you decide to act from your future self shortens the distance. Every choice made in alignment is a timeline collapse in motion. So don't wait. Don't delay the life that's waiting for you to say yes. Collapse the timeline. Become the version of you who no longer sees the future as far away because you've already brought it into the now. You are not chasing anything. You are remembering who you are. And from that place, time bends. Not because you're in a rush, but because you're finally in alignment. Chapter 18. Receive without earning. There is a belief buried deep in the fabric of how many people live that says, I must earn everything I receive. This belief is subtle. It's praised in culture, rewarded in school, and reinforced in work environments. It's the mindset that puts struggle on a pedestal, that equates worth with productivity, and that turns life into a ledger of output versus input. Somewhere along the way, you learn that receiving love, money, support, visibility, peace must be earned through sacrifice, that to receive fully, you must first prove you're deserving. And so you learn to delay your joy until you'd worked for it. You trained yourself to question ease, to mistrust generosity, and to apologize for your desires. You got comfortable with struggle because it made your rewards feel valid. But this belief, though common, is not truth. It is programming. And to fully step into abundance, you must unlearn the idea that worth must be proven before you can receive. Receiving without earning does not mean being entitled. It does not mean you don't show up, contribute, or create. It means you no longer believe your value is conditional on output. It means you understand that you are inherently worthy of receiving simply because you exist, simply because you are aligned, simply because you are open. It means you stop tying your self-worth to your to-do list. You stop viewing rest as a reward. You stop treating love as something you barter for with performance. You stop delaying pleasure until you've suffered enough to deserve it. You stop treating success as something to be earned through struggle and start seeing it as something to be allowed through alignment. The earning paradigm is deeply ingrained. It shows up in small ways. When you feel guilty for resting, when you downplay compliments, when you push away help, when you undercharge, when you hustle past your limits, when you explain your decisions to justify your value. These moments seem insignificant, but they reveal a core identity that is still rooted in proving you're enough, proving you're worthy, proving you've suffered enough to finally have what you want. But you don't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. You are allowed to receive without guilt, without hustle, without having to earn it through exhaustion. One of the reasons people struggle to receive is because they've never felt safe doing so. Somewhere along the way, receiving became linked with risk of being indebted, risk of being rejected, risk of being seen. So they built armor. They learned to do everything alone. They learned to be strong, independent, low-maintenance. They wore self-sufficiency like a badge of honor. And while independence can be powerful, it can also become a cage, because when you build your identity around not needing anything from anyone, you begin to block the very flow that abundance requires. Receiving is not weakness, it is vulnerability. And vulnerability is a form of strength that many never learn how to hold. To shift into an identity that receives with ease, you must rewire your nervous system to feel safe being supported. This doesn't happen through theory, it happens through practice. It means saying yes to help without apologizing. It means letting compliments land without deflecting them. It means allowing yourself to rest without labeling it lazy. It means accepting opportunities without immediately feeling like you have to over-deliver. It means letting good things be easy, even when ease feels unfamiliar, because the truth is, abundance moves fastest through open channels, and you cannot be open if you're constantly bracing for impact, scanning for proof, or trying to earn every ounce of what you allow in. Receiving without earning also means redefining what you believe about value. Value isn't just created through effort. Sometimes it's created through presence. Sometimes it's created through alignment, inspiration, creativity, clarity. If you only see value as something tied to how hard you work, you'll miss the power of being. You'll undercharge for brilliance that flows easily. You'll discount wisdom that took you years to earn just because you can now deliver it in minutes. You'll judge your ease and call it luck. But your ease is not an accident. It is the result of alignment, and when you honor that, you give yourself permission to receive, not just based on how hard something was, but based on how true it is. Many people fear that if they stop earning their worth, they will stop growing. But the opposite is true. When you stop hustling for value, you start creating from truth. You stop chasing validation and start anchoring into vision. You make decisions from self-trust instead of scarcity. You stop leaking energy into performance and start channeling it into purpose. Your work becomes cleaner, your relationships deepen, your self-respect expands. You don't do less, you simply stop doing what isn't aligned. And what you do offer becomes more potent, more impactful, and more rooted in authenticity. This shift also invites a deeper level of receptivity, not just from others, but from life itself. You begin to notice how supported you actually are, the synchronicities, the unexpected blessings, the resources that show up when you stop trying to micromanage every step. You start to live in a rhythm of trust instead of tension. And from that rhythm, you make peace with the idea that life wants to give to you, not test you, not withhold from you, not make you prove your worth over and over again. Life responds to who you are being, and when you are being someone who receives with grace, ease, and gratitude, the flow becomes effortless. You don't need to earn what already belongs to you. You don't need to suffer to justify your success. You don't need to trade your peace for approval. You only need to remember who you are. And from that remembrance you open, you receive, not with guilt, not with shame, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has come home to themselves. The old identity says, I must do more to be worthy. The new identity says, I am already worthy, and from that place I choose to give, to receive, to rest, to rise. This is not laziness, it is liberation. And when you stop needing to earn what you want, you finally allow yourself to live it. Chapter 19. Identity maintenance is identity expansion. There is a misconception that once you shift your identity, the work is done. That once you reach a new standard of self-concept, a new level of success, peace, or alignment, everything will lock into place and stay that way effortlessly. But the truth is, identity is not a fixed destination, it is a living frequency. And just like any frequency, it requires consistent tuning. The work doesn't end when you become the version of yourself who has it all. The work evolves. It becomes about sustaining, expanding, and deepening that identity. It becomes about maintaining who you've chosen to be, not because you're afraid of losing it, but because you understand that consistency is what turns temporary breakthroughs into permanent transformation. Maintenance is often misunderstood as a plateau, as if it's a passive phase of simply holding ground. But true identity maintenance is not about staying still. It is a dynamic, conscious practice of reinforcing your standard until it becomes unshakable. It is in this space that you build emotional muscle. You stop reacting to external circumstances with fragility. You stop depending on external validation to anchor your worth. You stop slipping back into old patterns when discomfort arises. Instead, you respond from identity. You lead with alignment, and you learn to stay with your expansion even when the novelty wears off. The reason many people experience breakthrough followed by breakdown is because they treat success as a high point, not a new baseline. They hit a goal, feel the rush, and then unconsciously return to old habits because they never practiced staying in the energy of what they achieved. They chased a version of themselves instead of becoming them. They got the result, but didn't yet hold the identity. So they sabotage, they stall, they create chaos to match the internal uncertainty. This is why identity work isn't just about becoming someone new, it's about staying someone new until it's no longer new, until it's who you are. Identity maintenance means continuing to choose the thoughts, habits, language, and environments that support your expansion, even when it feels repetitive, especially when it feels repetitive. Growth isn't always dramatic. It often looks like choosing integrity in moments no one else will notice. It looks like keeping your promises to yourself when motivation is gone. It looks like holding your boundary one more time, saying no more time, starting your day intentionally one more time. These moments don't always feel like breakthroughs, but they are. They are proof that you're stabilizing your new identity not through force, but through embodiment. This stage of the journey also tests your ability to live without constant external confirmation. When you're ascending, people notice. They celebrate you, support you, respond to the obvious shifts. But when you've sustained a new identity long enough, the external world stops clapping as loudly. The applause fades, the novelty wears off, and it becomes just who you are. This is where many people get restless. They think they need a new high, a new challenge, a new reinvention. But the truth is, mastery is found in maintenance. Excellence is not created in sprints. It's cultivated in the quiet, steady refinement of who you are over time. This is also where you become magnetic. Not because you are seeking attention, but because you are deeply rooted. People feel the energy of someone who is no longer performing their power, but simply inhabiting it. They feel the steadiness, the ease, the quiet confidence. And that energy creates results that go far beyond what ambition alone can produce. This is the difference between chasing success and holding success. One is temporary, the other becomes inevitable. Maintenance becomes expansion when you treat every day as an opportunity to reinforce your highest self. When you don't let progress become permission to slack on alignment. When you don't let comfort dilute your clarity, you keep rising. Not through pressure, but through presence. You keep checking in with your internal landscape. You refine your habits, sharpen your standards, clean up the parts of you that are still leaking energy. You don't wait for a crisis to reconnect to your vision. You stay connected because connection has become the norm. This level of identity also brings new responsibilities. You become someone others look to for stability, for leadership, for example. And while you're not responsible for anyone else's journey, you begin to understand the impact of how you live. Your alignment becomes a ripple effect. Your ability to maintain your identity through grace, discipline, and integrity becomes part of your legacy. Not because you're perfect, but because you are committed. Not because you never slip, but because you always return. The deeper truth is that maintenance is a form of self-respect. When you respect who you've become, you take care of that version of yourself. You don't sabotage them, you don't dismiss them, you don't throw away their peace for a moment of ego gratification. You protect your growth like something sacred, because it is. Because you know how hard you worked to become this version of yourself. Because you know what it cost you to break those patterns, to upgrade those standards, to rewire your entire way of being. And now that you have, you treat it with reverence. Maintenance is also what prevents burnout. When you make identity the focus instead of chasing outcomes, you stop living in extremes. You no longer need to pendulum between all in and completely disengaged. You find a sustainable rhythm, one that honors your nervous system, one that supports your creativity, one that leaves space for joy. And from that space, you create better work, build better relationships, and experience deeper fulfillment. Not because you're doing more, but because you're doing it from a place of grounded self-trust. This stage of identity work isn't always glamorous. It doesn't always come with applause or accolades. But it's where real power lives, not in the initial burst of transformation, but in the quiet decision to keep choosing alignment every single day, to keep honoring your new standard when no one is watching, to keep being who you said you would be. That is the kind of self-leadership that creates a life most people only glimpse in their imagination, and it's available to you not someday, not when it feels exciting, but now, today, again and again. You've already done the work of becoming. Now do the work of being. Maintain your identity like it matters, because it does. And as you do, you'll find that maintenance is not the end of transformation. It is the beginning of mastery. Chapter 20. Living the Shift Publicly. There is a moment in every identity shift when the work moves from private to public. Until now, your transformation may have been internal, quiet, deliberate. You've rewritten your self-concept, changed your internal dialogue, shifted your energy, upgraded your standards, and begun living from the identity of the version of you who has it all. But eventually, the shift demands to be seen, not because you need validation or applause, but because your external world must begin to reflect the internal truth you've already decided is real. Living the shift publicly is the point where you stop hiding your evolution. You stop managing perceptions. You stop softening your truth to make others more comfortable. You live your new identity in full view, not because you owe anyone an explanation, but because you've become someone who is no longer willing to fragment themselves for acceptance. This stage of growth is powerful, but it can also be uncomfortable. You will feel exposed, you will feel misunderstood, you will feel the eyes of others trying to place you back into the version of you they once knew. People around you may not know what to make of your new clarity, your new boundaries, your new confidence. Some may be supportive. Others may question, withdraw, or resist, not because they are bad people, but because your shift reminds them of their own stagnation. Your growth becomes a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look. Living the shift publicly requires you to hold your identity without needing the world to immediately reflect it back. You must be willing to walk through the tension of being seen in your in-between. You are no longer who you were, but you are still becoming more of who you are. It's raw, it's vulnerable, it's real, but it is also necessary. Identity, when kept entirely private, stays fragile. It needs friction to grow strong. Just like muscles need resistance to grow, your self-concept needs exposure to solidify. Every time you show up in alignment with your new identity, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable, you reinforce it. You teach the world how to treat you, not through demands or explanation, but through demonstration. This means you will sometimes outgrow conversations. You will step into rooms where you no longer relate to the energy being exchanged. You will speak differently, move differently, make decisions differently, and some people will notice. Not with admiration, but with skepticism. They may accuse you of changing, as if that's a betrayal. They may project their own fears onto your confidence. They may distance themselves, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stopped playing the role that made them feel secure. This is not your burden to carry. Your job is not to shrink so others feel more comfortable. Your job is to keep becoming the person your vision requires, even when others don't yet understand. There is a loneliness that can come with this phase. You may feel disconnected from old circles, unsure of your new community. But in that space between no longer and not yet, something beautiful happens. You begin to attract people who see you clearly, not for who you used to be, but for who you're choosing to be. People who don't need you to prove your worth. People who hold high standards and clear energy. People who inspire you not through pressure but through presence. But these connections only appear once you've made peace with being seen, without needing to be liked by everyone. Living the shift publicly also means being willing to show up before you feel fully ready. You share your voice before you're completely confident. You start the business before everything is perfect. You post the message, launch the offer, walk into the room, have the conversation, even when your hands shake. You lead yourself through visibility because you've stopped waiting to be fully polished. Wait. You've stopped hiding behind preparation. You know now that identity is not perfected in private and then revealed. It is forged through exposure, through presence, through repetition. You don't become the version of you who leads by waiting. You become them by stepping up before you feel entirely qualified. This is not about performing your growth. It's about living it, openly and unapologetically. You are not curating an image. You are embodying your truth. And that embodiment may be misunderstood by people who only know how to relate to the version of you that needed to explain, justify, and apologize. But clarity does not need to be defended. You can live your truth loudly without becoming defensive. You can let people misunderstand you and still move forward. You can allow discomfort and still remain grounded. Because when you're no longer performing for approval, you give yourself full permission to be whole in public. Living the shift publicly also becomes a gift. Your visibility becomes a beacon for others who are still whispering their truth in the dark. When you live fully expressed, you give silent permission for others to do the same. When you speak clearly, you create space for others to speak. When you live by standard instead of strategy, you show people what it looks like to lead from identity, not ego. You don't need to be a guru. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to live in a way that's congruent with your truth. That congruence is magnetic. That congruence changes rooms. And that congruence begins with you choosing to be seen. You cannot claim a powerful identity in secret. Eventually, you must walk into the world and live it, not perfectly, not loudly, not with theatrical force, but with integrity, with steadiness, with the calm confidence of someone who no longer fears being seen. And in doing so, you don't just experience the benefits of the shift. You embody the reality of it. You become the proof. You become the evidence that self-leadership works, that identity creates outcomes, that alignment is more powerful than performance, and that when you stop negotiating your expression, the world rises to meet you in ways it never could before. This is the work, not to change who you are so others approve, but to become so anchored in your truth that approval is irrelevant. Not to impress anyone, but to express the version of yourself who no longer waits for permission to live fully. And the moment you begin to live the shift publicly, without apology or delay, is the moment your identity becomes permanent. It is no longer something you're hoping for. It is something you are living in real time, in full presence, and in full view. Chapter 21. The Identity That Lasts. There is a version of you that can't be undone, a version that doesn't need reminders to stay in alignment, that no longer negotiates with doubt, that doesn't question their worth or seek confirmation from the outside world. This version of you isn't chasing clarity, they are clarity. They aren't seeking power, they are grounded in it. This is the identity that lasts, not because it was forced into existence, but because it was chosen over and over again until it became the only option. This identity isn't a role you play or a peak state you visit. It's a home you return to, a truth you live in, a reality you hold, no matter the season, the outcome, or the audience. An identity that lasts is not created overnight. It's not the product of one breakthrough or one decision. It's built through repetition, through integration, through staying with the version of yourself you've chosen. Even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is watching, even when old habits try to resurface. It's built in the quiet moments, the difficult conversations, the subtle choices that no one applauds, but that shape everything. Not dramatic, it's consistent. It's the result of no longer performing who you think you should be, and instead becoming who you truly are. To live from an unshakable identity, you must stop outsourcing your certainty. You stop measuring your value by outcomes. You stop basing your confidence on performance. You stop relying on other people's opinions to feel stable. You take full ownership of your frequency. You take responsibility for your energy. You become someone who trusts themselves, not because they always get it right, but because they've decided that trust is a non-negotiable. And from that place, your identity becomes rooted, grounded, durable, not rigid, but reliable, not inflexible, but immovable. A lasting identity isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing how to return to your truth again and again. It's about having emotional tools, spiritual anchors, and mental frameworks that keep you connected even when the world moves unpredictably. You become someone who can hold expansion without self-sabotage, someone who can grow in public without shrinking in private. You don't need constant reminders to stay in alignment because you've made alignment your baseline. It's no longer something you reach for, it's who you are. There is nothing flashy about this phase. In fact, it often goes unnoticed. You're not announcing your shift every week. You're not waiting for validation. You're just living it, quietly, powerfully, repeatedly. And that repetition builds depth. Depth builds embodiment, and embodiment is what makes the identity real. You can always tell the difference between someone who talks the talk and someone who lives the truth. The former knows the language. The latter carries the energy, and that energy can't be faked. It's the result of doing the work when no one else sees it, of holding the standard when it would be easier to bend, of saying yes to alignment even when compromise is more convenient. The identity that lasts is also deeply self-honoring. It's not about hustle or performance or constant output. It includes rest. It includes boundaries. It includes joy that doesn't have to be justified. This identity doesn't just sustain growth, it sustains the human inside the growth. It makes room for the full range of your experience. You no longer shame yourself for being in process. You no longer fear failure. You no longer rush to fix what simply needs to be felt. You begin to trust your pace. You begin to respect your own rhythm. You begin to lead yourself with compassion instead of control. And in that space, you become unstoppable, not because you're invincible, but because you're finally integrated. What people call resilience is often just identity that's been lived long enough to hold shape under pressure. When you've rehearsed your truth often enough, it doesn't fall apart at the first sign of challenge. When you've walked with your standards long enough, they don't crumble in the face of conflict. You don't need to fight for your identity anymore. You embody it. You lead with it. And in doing so, you create stability not just for yourself, but for everyone connected to you. You become the anchor. You become the example. You become the reminder that it is possible to live from vision instead of fear. You will still evolve. You will still stretch. You will still become. But you won't be doing it from a place of emptiness. You won't be upgrading from a place of lack. You'll be building from wholeness, expanding from sufficiency, creating from abundance. The identity that lasts isn't static, it's fluid. It allows room for change without requiring collapse. It adapts without losing integrity. And it grows without losing its grounding. You don't have to reinvent yourself every time life shifts. You simply realign, you recalibrate. You remember who you are and move accordingly. You'll know you've reached this level of identity when the inner voice that once questioned everything becomes quiet. When the fear that once made you hesitate becomes background noise. When the self-trust that once felt like a stretch becomes your starting point. You don't wake up needing to convince yourself of your worth. You don't need a morning routine to feel powerful. You don't need constant proof that you're on the right path. You just live. And your life becomes the evidence. Your choices reflect your standard. Your boundaries reflect your value. Your energy reflects your clarity. And your results reflect the inevitability of someone who has stopped negotiating with their old self. This is what you were always moving toward, not just a better life, but a truer version of you. Not just new habits, but a new home inside yourself. Not just external success, but internal congruence. And you got here not by wishing, not by pretending, not by waiting, but by choosing. Over and over again, even when it was hard, even when it was lonely, even when no one else understood, you chose alignment, you chose growth. You chose to become someone who no longer waits for life to confirm their identity, but instead lives in a way that confirms it daily. Let this be your reminder. Nothing was ever missing. Nothing was ever broken. You weren't behind, you weren't late, you were simply remembering. You were simply rising. You were simply coming home to the version of you that's been waiting all along to be chosen. This identity is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is not for sale. It is yours. And it will carry you into every next level with more grace, more power, and more truth than you've ever known.